All right, this is your video on the Constitution. First off, when discussing the Constitution, we have to look at kind of the uh, different frameworks and systems that the founders used to establish their new government. First off, the British colonial rule had that unitary system. So if you look at the graphic there, all power flows from one central government, one location. All the power is in that central government. There are subunits, and then in this case would be the colonies. In the UK's case, there's different countries within, but all the power resides in that one central location. For your Articles of Confederation or the Confederation system, which was created under the Articles of Confederation, all the power was concentrated in these subunits or the states. So the states had more power, creating a weak central government or a weak federal government. The only way they really would unite would be a common goal. Maybe they were being attacked, but not necessarily. The Constitution then creates a federal system. These powers are divided and shared between state and central governments. Again, there's going to be a strong central government, but states will still have their power. And if you look at the arrows, they're going back and forth, meaning that they share certain powers and they have their own separate powers. This is the idea of federalism. So, you guys read the Articles of Confederation, and the biggest thing there is to look at the relationship between the Articles of Confederation and the constant argument of how strong should the federal government be. So a quick overview again on the Articles, 1781 to 1789. It was more of a league of friendship. Again, the states had the power, and this was your original government structure for the United States after the Declaration of Independence. Again, creates that weak central government because they wanted the states to have power. They also had no executive branch because they hated the idea of a tyrant or a king. Some other weaknesses. Article 2, each state retains its sovereignty, meaning they're independent. Freedom, government has no control. So, again, the states can do almost what they would like. There is only one House of Congress, and each state only had one vote. Didn't matter about their population. There's supermajority needed, 9 of 13, to pass a law, which was difficult. And to amend the Constitution, they had to have the agreements of all 13 states. Like I mentioned, there's no executive branch, no president, and they had no Supreme Courts. They had no central law. The states were in charge of that. The biggest thing, they had no control over taxation, so they couldn't fund or pay back debts based off of taxes because they didn't like being taxed. When we talk about Shays rebelling, again, colonies were in debt after the war, and the government decided they tried to tax these states to get money to pay back that debt. Farmers in western Massachusetts rebelled. They didn't like it because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't pay their own taxes. So they rebelled against individuals like the judges, the people trying to collect those debts, and they were freeing people that were being jailed. The government had no control. So this shows, again, a weak national government would not work. And what they needed was a strong federal structure. So what we're going to look at is the Constitutional Convention and the idea that compromises were needed in order to create the United States Constitution as we know it. So at the convention, 1787, their goal was to revise the Articles of Confederation. All these different people, different delegates, except from Rhode Island were there, lawyers, farmers, business owners, again, all male, all white, and they wanted to create a representative type democracy. So the goal, how strong should the national government be? And they had a couple plans. So Virginia individuals, as you read, were there earlier with some other larger states, and they wanted to favor their larger states. They wanted a strong central government, and they wanted to create a Congress, legislative branch with two houses or bicameral. The larger house was the House of Representatives, elected by the people, and a smaller house that was selected by these representatives, known as the Senate. However, this model, they do use the two bicameral system in our system today, and the 17th Amendment changed so that the people actually elect those in the Senate. The other plan, favored by the smaller states, or the New Jersey plan, agreed with a strong government, central government, but Congress would be one house, unicameral, with everyone having equal votes because they didn't like the idea based on population. So here comes the great compromise. The bicameral legislature, in which the House of Representatives membership apportioned according to state populations, plus they had to deal with the slave population. So 3/5 of a slave counted as a person. They'd have an upper house, the Senate, which would have 2 members from each state, elected by, again, at that time, by the House of Representatives. So they had one house, the House of Representatives, elected by population, and the Senate equal per state. Okay, so they needed support from all these states to ratify or create this new constitution, so they made this compromise. Again, that 3/5 compromise agreed to allow the South to count 3/5 of their population in each state. So the slaves would count as 3/5 of their population so that they could put that towards their House of Representatives. Another compromise thing they were looking at was the Electoral College. The framers did not like the idea of having a popularly elected executive branch official. So they have a congressional selection and a direct popular election. However, in the Electoral College, for the president, they would have electors, and it would equal the number of individuals in their House of Representatives plus their senators, and those people would vote. So these individuals were chosen by the framers, by the founders, by the individuals in those House of Reps and Senate, and they'd actually choose their candidates for the president. They did not trust the people at this time. When creating the Constitution, there's principles to look at. The idea of popular sovereignty. Power to govern belongs to the people, so giving the power to people, that representative type government. Separation of powers, division of government between branches. So one branch has the power to make laws, legislative branch. The executive branch is enforcing those laws, and the judicial branch will interpret the laws. They do this through checks and balances. For example, if the legislature is creating a law, then the president has the power to check on the legislative branch by vetoing it. Or the judicial branch has the power to check by declaring that law unconstitutional. They also have the principle of limited government. Government is not all powerful. Again, giving some of the power to the citizens, not creating a tyrant. And then federalism, division of power between the central federal government and the individual states. There's another example of the powers or separation of powers. Again, the judiciary branch interprets, executive enforces, legislative will pass. That's Congress. For the Constitution, they wanted the ability to change it a little easier than the Articles of Confederation. So, not completely easy. It's still difficult. It's Article 5 of the Constitution. And they also wanted the states to have a say, not just the federal government. So, again, there's some action within the states. That kind of reflects the idea of the Federalist structure. The amendment proposed first by 2/3 vote in each House of Congress, and then it must be ratified or accepted by 3/4 of all the states. In order to get the Constitution passed itself, it's Article 7, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of the state. Again, there's 13 states at this time. They needed 9 to pass this new Constitution to become their new law of their land. However, it wasn't very easy at first to convince people, and there was 2 sides created. This is kind of the beginning of political parties in a sense. You have your Federalist and your Anti-Federalist viewpoints. Your Federalists, again, they're in favor of the adoption of the Constitution as it was, and they like the strong government. The Anti-Federalists opposed it because they opposed how strong that central government was going to be. They agreed that the central government needed to be stronger than the Articles of Confederation, but at that time they thought it became too strong. So individuals, to convince people, started writing anonymous papers called the Federalist Papers. They're very hard to read. They say it's kind of the best political theory in the United States, and they're written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. Again, the purpose was to influence, at first, people in New York to agree upon ratification, and also convince the public that they're doing the right thing. One of those papers and one of the required documents in this course is Federalist 10 that we will read. It talks about factions. And the Founding Fathers were concerned that our government would be ripped apart because of factions. It also talks about the idea of separation of powers. Each branch of government keeps the other from gaining power. And they said that factions will always exist, but because of the system, it will help manage them. They also have Federalist 51, talks about the idea of checks and balances. Again, separation of powers. The anti-Federalist viewpoint also had a response. Again, they thought central government was threatening people's personal liberties. They didn't want a tyrant, and they wanted individual rights to be guaranteed. And they still felt the power of the states was limited. So they had one response in the Brutus 1. The U.S. was too large to be governed efficiently. Again, allowing the government too much power requires people to sacrifice their liberties. They didn't like that. And Congress has too much power. They preferred the idea that the states had a little bit more power to make some of those laws. So again, we're talking about compromise. The compromise that came out of this was the Bill of Rights. 10 amendments to the Constitution. They appeased the anti-federalists to help with ratification, guaranteed some of those individual rights, limited the power of the national government, and gave more power to the states. This was ratified in 1789 was the Constitution was ratified with the promise that the Bill of Rights would be added. It was added in 1791.